Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's a tale of an unexpected offer, a life-changing decision, and a bond that would form under the strangest of circumstances. Meet Mark Davis. He was just an ordinary guy, hard-working, struggling through law school, juggling a part-time job, and facing mounting debts left by his late father. But everything was about to change. One rainy afternoon, Mark received a phone call that would alter the course of his life forever. "Mr. Davis," the voice on the other end of the line said, calm and composed. "This is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "How do you know about my I know enough?" Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "Let's meet at Brooks Bistro. 7:00 p.m. It's important." The line went dead before Mark could protest. His thoughts raced. Who was she? Why did she know about his debts? And why did she want to meet him? It was all so strange, yet something about it felt important. He decided to go. That evening, Mark arrived at the bistro, the rain pouring down in sheets. He stepped inside, immediately greeted by the warm aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread. Eleanor was already seated at a corner table, looking every bit the wealthy businesswoman that she was. Her silver hair, impeccable suit, and cool demeanor made her stand out even in the luxurious surroundings. "Mark," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Please, take a seat." Her voice was calm, almost commanding, but there was something else beneath it, an undercurrent of authority that he could not ignore. "Mrs. Brooks, what's this about?" Mark asked, still unsure of what was going on. Eleanor placed a folder on the table, her fingers brushing over the papers inside as she looked at him with sharp, piercing eyes. "I know about your situation," she said softly. "The debts your father left behind, the pressure you're under. I can help you. All I ask in return is a simple favor: marry me." Mark blinked in disbelief. "What? Marry you? You're serious, right? I don't even know you." Eleanor's expression softened just slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "It's not about love, Mark," she replied. "It's a business arrangement. I'm wealthy. I have no heirs, no family left to carry on my legacy. I need someone by my side, someone I can trust. In exchange, I will pay off your debts, set you up for life, and ensure your financial security. You'll never have to worry again. You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. Marrying me would solve all your problems." Mark's mind raced. Could he really do this? Could he marry a stranger for the sake of his family, for the sake of his future? It felt wrong, but the opportunity was too good to ignore. He was torn between his pride and his desperation. His mother's health was deteriorating, and his younger sister's tuition loomed large. He could save them all with this one decision. He sat in silence for a moment, weighing the consequences. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why pick me?" Eleanor smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "You're a perfect candidate. You're a man who's struggling but hasn't given up. You're resourceful, intelligent, and not involved with anyone else. You're exactly what I need." Mark didn't know what to say. It felt like his whole life had led to this moment, this strange offer. His mind screamed at him to say no, to protect his dignity. But another part of him, the part that had seen his family's struggles, the part that had dreamed of a better life, urged him to say yes. Maybe this was his chance to escape the cycle of debt and uncertainty. He had no other choice. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately. I'll have my lawyer draw up the contract." As they shook hands, Mark couldn't help but wonder what he had just gotten himself into. Was this really the solution to all his problems, or had he just signed up for a life he couldn't possibly imagine? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. And as Mark left the bistro that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into a world that was far beyond his control. But little did he know, the real challenge was not in the marriage itself, but in what would happen when true feelings started to surface. The lines between fake and real would soon blur, and he would find himself in a situation far more complicated than he ever imagined. The following morning, the gray Texas sky hung low over the small college town as Mark walked home from the bistro, his mind spinning. The rain had eased into a mist, but it still clung to his clothes, soaking through his jacket. He kept replaying Eleanor's words in his head. Marry me. It sounded insane, impossible, and yet, he had agreed. His boots splashed through puddles as he reached the small rented house he shared with his mother. The warm light spilling from the kitchen window was the only comfort he could find in the chaos of his thoughts. Inside, the smell of chamomile tea greeted him. His mother sat at the table, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she folded a stack of medical bills. She looked up when he entered, her tired eyes searching his. Mark, she said softly, where have you been? You look like you have seen a ghost. He hesitated, unsure how to explain the conversation he had just had with a stranger who offered to erase his debts in exchange for a marriage. Finally, he sat down opposite her and told her everything: Eleanor Brooks, the proposal, the conditions. His mother listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she took a long sip of tea and set her cup down carefully. I know it sounds unthinkable, she said, her voice trembling, but maybe she is right. Maybe this is your chance. Mark frowned. You are asking me to marry someone I do not love, Mom. To save us? She reached across the table and took his hand. I am asking you to save yourself. To save us. You have carried this family since your father died. You have done everything you could. Maybe this is the way life is giving something back. Her words hit him like a weight. He wanted to protest, to scream that this was wrong, but deep down, he knew she was right. Pride did not pay hospital bills, and integrity did not erase debt collectors. He spent the night staring at the ceiling, sleep evading him. The sound of rain tapping on the roof matched the storm inside his head. By morning, he had made up his mind. At exactly 10 o'clock, he walked back into Brooks' bistro. Eleanor was there, sitting at the same corner table, a cup of tea in hand, as if she had been expecting him. You have decided, she said, not looking up from her tablet. Yes, Mark replied quietly. I will do it. She smiled faintly and set the tablet aside. Good. The arrangements will be made immediately. She handed him a folder, thick with legal papers. My attorney will walk you through the details. The ceremony will be simple, no press, no witnesses except the necessary ones. This is a contract, not a love story. Her tone was cool and businesslike, but Mark noticed a flicker of something loneliness, maybe beneath her words. 2 days later, they stood in a small courthouse. The judge, an older man with a calm expression, read the vows in a flat voice. Mark wore a dark suit Eleanor had provided. She stood beside him, elegant as ever in a pale gray dress, her silver hair tied neatly at the back of her neck. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor extended her hand. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis, she said with a polite smile. Her grip was firm, professional. There was no warmth, no spark, just the weight of what they had agreed to. As they left the courthouse, the drizzle had returned. The car waiting outside was a sleek black sedan, the kind Mark had only seen in movies. The driver opened the door, and Eleanor gestured for him to get in. We will go to my estate. It will be your home now, she said simply. Mark stared out the window as the city faded into countryside, his reflection blurring against the rain-streaked glass. When the car finally stopped, his breath caught. The Brooks estate was vast, with towering columns and manicured gardens that seemed to stretch for acres. It looked more like a museum than a home. As they stepped inside, the marble floors gleamed under the chandelier light. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old money. You will find everything you need here, Eleanor said, her heels clicking softly as she led him down the hall. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. Dinner is at 7. Punctuality matters. Her tone left no room for questions. Mark nodded silently, taking in the grandeur of it all. His room was larger than the entire house he had grown up in. A king-sized bed, antique furniture, and a window that looked out over endless fields. But despite its beauty, the space felt cold, untouched, like it had never known laughter or warmth. That evening, they dined together at a long table that could have seated 20, but only 2 chairs were occupied. The food was exquisite, but the silence between them was heavy. Eleanor ate quietly, her expression unreadable. Finally, Mark spoke. "Why me, really?" She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time that night. "Because you have nothing to lose," she said softly. "And neither do I." For a moment, the mask slipped, and he saw something raw behind her composed exterior, something that almost made sense of it all. As the clock chimed in the distance, Mark realized that his new life had truly begun. It was not love, not yet, but something was stirring beneath the surface, something neither of them was ready to admit. The days passed in a blur. Mark had settled into a routine at the Brooks estate, though he still felt like an outsider in this grand, unfamiliar world. Eleanor kept her distance, her professionalism unwavering. They shared meals, exchanged polite conversation, and followed the terms of their arrangement without question. He stayed in his room most evenings, trying to keep busy with work for his final year of law school, but it was hard to focus with everything that had changed. Eleanor was always there, a quiet presence in the house, but they rarely spoke of anything personal. The mansion was enormous, yet somehow it felt empty. No laughter echoed through its halls, no lightness. Mark had never lived like this, and it felt strange, almost suffocating. One evening, as Mark sat alone in the large study, going over his assignments, he heard a soft knock on his door. He looked up, surprised. It was unusual for Eleanor to interrupt him like this, especially without warning. "Come in," he called, setting down his papers. The door creaked open, and Eleanor stood there, framed by the dim light from the hallway. Her expression was as composed as ever, but something in her eyes seemed different tonight, softer, more vulnerable. "Mark," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I need you to come with me. There's something I want to show you." Mark stood, a bit confused. "What is it?" "Just come," she insisted, stepping back and holding the door open for him. "It's important." He followed her through the grand hallway, past the towering columns, and down a narrow corridor he hadn't seen before. At the end of the hallway was a door Mark hadn't noticed, tucked away behind a collection of old paintings. Eleanor stopped in front of it, hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with heavy velvet curtains drawn shut. Mark could make out the faint outlines of old furniture covered in dust, and a large, old-fashioned desk in the corner. But it wasn't the furniture that caught his attention, it was the walls. They were lined with framed photographs, but not just any photographs. Family photos, old black-and-white pictures of Eleanor as a young girl, pictures of a man who could only be her father, and others of people Mark didn't recognize. There were pictures of a life Eleanor had left behind, a life far removed from the stoic businesswoman he had come to know. "This is the room my father kept," Eleanor said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "He passed away a few years ago, and I haven't been able to bring myself to touch anything in here since. I suppose it's time to finally face it." Mark glanced at her, not knowing what to say. This was the first time she had ever opened up to him like this, and he could see the weight of grief in her eyes. Despite the coldness she had shown him, there was a depth to her that he had never realized. "I never wanted this life," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "My father built this empire, but he never left me anything meaningful. I inherited everything, but I'm still alone. I never had a family. I don't know how to fix that, Mark. I've always been so focused on my business, on my success, that I never realized what I was missing. But now I'm not so sure anymore." Mark stood there, at a loss for words. He had never seen this side of Eleanor before, this fragile, uncertain woman who had built an empire but still felt empty inside. The walls of the estate that had seemed so cold and unwelcoming suddenly felt more human, more real. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the unspoken words and emotions that had been building between them since their first meeting. Then, Eleanor looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge his reaction. "I don't know what I was expecting when I asked you to marry me, Mark," she said, her voice quieter now. "Maybe I thought it would be easier. That we could just play our roles, pretend. But I see now. I see what I've been missing. I don't want this to just be a contract anymore. I want something real. Maybe I'm asking too much, but I don't know how else to fix this." Mark felt a strange tightness in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to show him this side of herself. But as he looked at her, something inside him shifted. It wasn't love, knew that. But there was a deep connection now, a sense of shared understanding that hadn't been there before. "You're not asking too much," he said softly, his voice steady. "I think we both want something real, even if we don't know what that looks like yet." He stepped closer to her, the words coming more easily now. "I'm not the man you thought I was when you made this deal. And I'm not sure what comes next, but I'm willing to try." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not uncomfortable or cold, but soft, tentative. They were no longer two strangers bound by a contract. Something had shifted between them, and for the first time since they met, Mark felt like he was seeing Eleanor as a person, not just a businesswoman. As they stood there in that small, dusty room filled with memories, Mark realized that maybe this strange arrangement wasn't as simple as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, they were both searching for something more than what they had agreed to. And for the first time, he felt a spark of hope that this could turn into something real. The journey ahead would be uncertain, but perhaps it was a journey worth taking together. The next few days were quieter than usual, the house somehow less empty despite the vast space that stretched out before them. Eleanor and Mark continued their daily routines, but there was a subtle shift between them, a new understanding that neither of them had expected. They began to share more than just small talk. They shared their thoughts, their fears, and their pasts. For the first time, the walls that had stood between them seemed to soften. Eleanor began to open up more, sharing stories from her childhood, her strained relationship with her father, and the loneliness that came with running a business empire alone. Mark, in turn, found himself talking about his father, the heavy burden of debt, and the dreams he had once had before life became a struggle for survival. Their conversations weren't filled with grand declarations, but the small exchanges were beginning to feel real. One evening, as they sat together in the library, Eleanor looked at Mark, her eyes searching. "You've changed since we first met," she said softly. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself now, like you believe in something again." Mark paused, thinking about her words. It was true. He felt different. The weight of the contract that had bound him was no longer the only thing that held him to this place. He was starting to feel like he belonged, not just as her husband in a business arrangement, but as someone who mattered to her. "I never thought I'd feel like this," he said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "I came here to fix my life, to pay off my family's debts and do what I had to do. But now, it's more than that. I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm not as afraid of it anymore." Eleanor smiled softly, the first real smile Mark had seen from her in weeks. "Neither am I," she replied. "I think we both know this isn't just a business arrangement anymore. But what happens next, I don't know. I've never been in a real relationship before." Mark could sense the vulnerability in her words. As powerful as she was, Eleanor had always kept her heart guarded, hidden behind the walls of her success. But now, those walls seemed to be crumbling, bit by bit, as she allowed herself to trust him. "We take it one step at a time," Mark said, his voice steady. "No pressure, no expectations. Let's just see where this goes." Eleanor nodded, her eyes softening as she reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, but for Mark, it meant more than words ever could. Over the next week, the connection between them deepened. Their days were still full of routine meals together, business meetings, and quiet evenings spent reading or talking. But the atmosphere in the house had shifted. There was a warmth now, a sense of togetherness that had never been there before. One evening, Eleanor asked Mark to join her for a gala that she had been planning for months. It was a formal affair, one that required her to wear the finest gowns and interact with the most influential people in the city. Mark wasn't thrilled at the idea of attending another one of these events, but he knew it meant something to her. He agreed, and the night of the gala, they arrived at the venue together. The venue was extravagant, with chandeliers sparkling above and guests mingling in their finest attire. Eleanor was a vision in a black velvet gown, her silver hair styled flawlessly, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as they entered the room together. They made their way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with business partners, old friends, and potential clients. Mark had never been in this world before, but Eleanor made him feel at ease. She introduced him to everyone as her husband, a title that still felt strange but was beginning to take on a new meaning. As the night went on, Mark realized something. For the first time, he wasn't just playing a part. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was Mark Davis, standing beside Eleanor Brooks, and he belonged there. They had walked into the gala as a couple with a contract, but now they were something more. As the evening came to an end, Eleanor took his hand once more, her grip firm but warm. "You did well tonight," she said with a genuine smile. "I think they're starting to see us as a team, not just as business partners." Mark smiled back, feeling a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to his debts or his family's future. It was his own. "We make a good team," he said, the words feeling right. They walked out of the gala side by side, the night air cool against their skin, but the warmth between them was undeniable. In that moment, Mark realized that maybe this strange, unexpected arrangement had turned into something more. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something real. The days that followed the gala were filled with an unexpected sense of calm. Mark and Eleanor had begun to fall into a rhythm, their relationship growing in ways neither of them had anticipated. They still spent their days managing the responsibilities of their individual lives, the business meetings, the charity events, the daily tasks, but now, there was something deeper between them. They shared quiet moments together, moments that didn't feel like duty or obligation, but something real. One morning, Mark sat at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee as Eleanor walked in, her hair still damp from the shower. She smiled when she saw him, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way that took Mark by surprise. "Morning," she said softly, taking a seat beside him. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," he replied, looking at her with a slight smile of his own. "You?" "The same," she answered, her voice softening. She looked down at her hands for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Mark, can we talk?" Mark put down his cup of coffee, sensing the shift in her tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, about everything. And I realized that I've been holding back." Mark looked at her, confused. "Holding back how?" She met his gaze, her eyes vulnerable in a way that she rarely allowed. "When we first started this arrangement, I thought it was just a contract. I thought it would be easy. But now, I'm not sure. I don't want to keep pretending. I don't want to hide behind this marriage anymore. I'm tired of pretending." Mark's heart raced as he listened to her. He had never seen her so exposed, so uncertain. "Eleanor," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "You don't have to hide. I don't want you to feel like you're still pretending. This isn't just a business deal anymore. We've both changed, haven't we?" She nodded slowly, her eyes searching his. "I never thought I'd let someone in. Not like this. But you've made me feel things I haven't felt in years. You've made me believe that maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. That maybe we could be more than what we signed up for." Mark squeezed her hand, his own emotions rising to the surface. "I never expected this either. But Eleanor, I want you to know I am here. Not just because of the contract, not just because of the debts I had. I'm here because I want to be. I'm here because I care about you." There was a long silence between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, Eleanor let out a soft breath, her shoulders relaxing. "I think I've been afraid," she admitted quietly. "Afraid of letting myself feel. Afraid of what it might mean." Mark smiled gently. "I get it. I've been afraid, too. But I think we've both been given a chance here, not just to fix our lives, but to build something real. Together." Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at him. For the first time since they'd met, she seemed completely present, not hiding behind her business persona or her guarded walls. She leaned forward, her hand still resting in his. "I don't know what happens next," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I want to find out with you. I want to see where this goes." Mark nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of hope and relief. "We'll take it one step at a time. No expectations, just us." Eleanor smiled, the warmth in her eyes a stark contrast to the coldness that had defined their relationship in the beginning. "I think that sounds perfect." Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. They took time to enjoy the little moments together, lazy afternoons in the garden, quiet dinners at home, walks around the estate. They were still learning about each other, still figuring out how to navigate the complexities of their relationship, but for the first time, they both felt like they were on the same page. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to face both with the business and with their emotions, but they had started something that felt real. Mark had never imagined that a marriage born out of necessity could lead to something so deep, so meaningful. But as he stood beside Eleanor at a family gathering she had invited him to, he realized that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The people in the room looked at them with curiosity, some with surprise, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet connection between him and Eleanor, the understanding that had grown between them. He had once come to this place with nothing but a contract, but now, he felt like he had everything. And as Eleanor caught his eye across the room, her smile soft and inviting, Mark knew that their journey was just beginning. As the weeks went by, life at the Brooks estate began to feel different. The cold marble halls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter and conversation. The long dinners that used to feel like obligations had turned into evenings filled with warmth and quiet joy. Eleanor seemed lighter, freer somehow, as if she was rediscovering a part of herself that had been locked away for years. Mark noticed it in the way she smiled now, not the polite smile of a businesswoman maintaining appearances, but a genuine one that reached her eyes. For the first time since they had met, she seemed happy. Mark had taken on more responsibilities too. He began helping with the legal matters of Eleanor's company, learning how the business ran from the inside. She had been impressed by his sharp mind and thoughtful approach, and soon, they were working side by side. Their partnership was seamless, built on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set behind the gardens, Mark found Eleanor standing by the window in her study, staring out at the fading light. The orange glow reflected in her eyes, and she looked lost in thought. "You've been quiet tonight," he said softly, walking up beside her. "Is something on your mind?" Eleanor sighed, crossing her arms. "There's a board meeting tomorrow. It's the first one since we became more than just a business arrangement." Mark smiled slightly. "And you're worried what they'll think?" "They'll question everything," she said. "My decisions, my leadership, even my judgment. They'll see you and assume I've lost focus." Mark turned to face her, his voice calm but firm. "Let them think what they want. You've built this empire with your own hands. They can't take that away from you." Eleanor looked at him, her expression softening. "You always know what to say." "That's because I believe in you," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You shouldn't. I've made plenty of mistakes." "We all have," Mark said, his voice gentle. "But you don't let them define you. That's what makes you strong." For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. Then she turned toward him, her gaze holding his. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another desperate man looking for a way out. I never expected you to become the one person I'd rely on." Mark chuckled softly. "I wasn't exactly expecting to marry a millionaire either. Life's funny that way." They shared a quiet laugh, but the air between them felt charged with something deeper, something unspoken. The next day, the board meeting went as Eleanor had predicted. Some of the senior members questioned her decisions, subtly hinting that her recent marriage had been a distraction. Eleanor handled their criticism with her usual composure, but Mark could see the strain behind her calm expression. When one of the members, a sharp-tongued man named Richard, insinuated that she had married Mark for appearances, something inside Mark snapped. He stood up, his voice firm. "With all due respect, Mrs. Brooks has done more for this company than anyone in this room. Her decisions are the reason we're standing here today. You don't get to question her integrity just because you don't understand her choices." The room fell silent. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly, mumbling an apology before sitting down. The rest of the meeting went on without further interruptions. Afterward, as the board members filed out, Eleanor turned to Mark. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "You've stood up for everyone else your whole life. It's about time someone stood up for you." For a moment, she just looked at him, her eyes glistening with something she couldn't hide. Then she whispered, "Thank you." That night, as they sat together in the garden, the air was cool and calm. The stars stretched across the sky, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. It was enough just to be there, side by side. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You know, I used to think love was a distraction," she said softly. "Something that got in the way of success. But now, I'm starting to think maybe it's the only thing that gives it meaning." Mark turned to her, his eyes steady. "Maybe love isn't the opposite of success. Maybe it's what makes success worth having." She smiled at that, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "You always know how to say the right thing." "That's because you inspire it," he said simply. Eleanor looked away, her cheeks faintly flushed. For a woman who had built her life on control and power, it was the first time she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, and she didn't hate it. As the night deepened, Mark reached over, taking her hand in his. She didn't pull away. In that quiet moment, under the stars, it no longer mattered how their marriage had begun or what the world thought. What mattered was the truth. Neither of them could deny anymore. What had started as a contract had become something real, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them desperately needed. It had been several weeks since that night in the garden, and Mark and Eleanor's relationship had grown even stronger. The changes in their dynamic were undeniable, but so was the pressure. Eleanor had faced skepticism from her board members, and Mark could feel the weight of the contract that still loomed over them. Despite their growing bond, there was still a part of him that wondered if it could all really be real, if they could truly build something lasting after starting with a business arrangement. One afternoon, as Mark walked into the study, he found Eleanor sitting at her desk, staring at a stack of papers. Her brow was furrowed, and for a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should interrupt her concentration. But then, she looked up, and her eyes were tired, clouded with something more than just the usual stress of work. "Everything okay?" Mark asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. She let out a sigh and pushed the papers aside. "I'm just tired, Mark. There's been so much pressure lately. Between the company, the board, and this marriage. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending it's all fine." He walked over and sat down next to her, concern etched across his face. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, his voice steady. "You've been carrying this weight for so long. I'm here now. You don't have to do it alone." She met his gaze, her eyes softening as she reached for his hand. "I know," she whispered. "But sometimes, I don't know how to let go of the control. I've spent my entire life managing everything, running a company, making decisions that affect so many people. But this is different. I've never had to depend on anyone else before." Mark squeezed her hand gently, his voice filled with understanding. "I get it. You've been doing it on your own for so long that asking for help feels unnatural. But you don't have to do it all yourself anymore. We're a team, Eleanor." She nodded slowly, looking down at their hands intertwined on the desk. For the first time in a long while, she felt the tension in her chest begin to loosen, the walls she had built around herself starting to crumble, piece by piece. I think I'm afraid of losing myself if I let someone else in," she admitted quietly. Mark smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. "You're not going to lose yourself, Eleanor. You're not just this company or this empire you've built. You're more than that. And you don't have to sacrifice who you are to share your life with someone." Eleanor looked up at him, her expression softening with a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "I've never known anyone who's been this patient with me, Mark. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of trust." He leaned in slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "You don't have to be ready yet. Trust takes time. And I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes." She let out a small breath, a tear slipping from the corner of her eye before she quickly wiped it away. "I don't know how I got so lucky," she said, her voice trembling. Mark reached up, gently wiping the tear from her cheek. "You're not lucky, Eleanor. You're strong. And it's your strength that brought us here, together." The words hung in the air between them, a moment of shared understanding. Eleanor took a deep breath, a small but genuine smile forming on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, the weight of the world seeming to lift, even if just for a moment. "I don't say it enough, but thank you for being here with me. For standing by me." Mark squeezed her hand again, his voice steady. "You don't have to thank me, Eleanor. I'm here because I want to be." For the first time, Eleanor felt the burden of her past begin to fade away. The fear of being vulnerable, of losing control, was still there, but it wasn't as heavy anymore. She wasn't facing it alone. And with Mark beside her, she knew she could begin to let go, piece by piece, and embrace the future they were building together. The next day, Eleanor faced the board once again, but this time, something was different. She held her head high, her posture confident as she spoke to them. She wasn't just defending her decisions anymore, she was asserting them. When the meeting ended, she turned to Mark, a small, proud smile tugging at her lips. "I think they finally got the message." Mark smiled back, the pride in his eyes evident. "I think you showed them who you really are." As they walked out of the building together, hand in hand, the weight of their past struggles seemed a little lighter. They weren't just two people bound by a contract anymore. They were partners, facing the world together, and for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work something real, something lasting. And with that thought, she realized she had already started letting go of the control. She had already begun to trust. And in the end, that was all she needed. The weeks following Eleanor's breakthrough at the board meeting brought a new sense of stability to their lives. The pressure that had once weighed so heavily on her shoulders seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence. Eleanor was no longer just a powerful CEO running a successful business empire, she was also a woman who had begun to allow herself to feel. She had let go of some of the control she had held onto for so long, and in doing so, she had found a deeper connection with Mark. Their relationship continued to grow, not out of obligation or duty, but out of something more genuine, more real. Mark was no longer just a man fulfilling a contract, he was a partner, a confidant, and someone Eleanor began to trust with more than just her business. One afternoon, as the two of them sat on the terrace, watching the sunset together, Eleanor turned to Mark, her voice soft and hesitant. "Mark," she began, her words carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about the future, about us. And I think it's time we make it official." Mark looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean by official?" She smiled slightly, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her expression. I think it's time we stop pretending that this is just a business arrangement. I want to take the next step with you. I want us to be real, Mark. Not just for the world, but for us. For what we've built together." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Mark was still processing what she had said, but as he looked into her eyes, he realized something profound. Eleanor was not just asking for a future with him, she was offering it. It wasn't just about the wealth or the contract anymore, it was about love. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You mean, you want us to make it official? Like, for real?" Eleanor laughed softly, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, exactly. No more pretending. No more contracts. Just us. Together." Mark felt his heart swell with emotion. This was everything he had hoped for, but it was more than that. It was everything he had never known he needed. He reached for her hand, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't need any contracts, Eleanor. I don't need anything but you. We've already built something real. And whatever comes next, I want it to be with you." Eleanor's smile widened, her eyes shining with happiness. She leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Then it's settled. We're doing this. We're going to make it real." The days that followed were filled with planning. The decision to move forward, to truly build a life together, was not a simple one. It meant not just continuing their partnership but facing the world as a couple, with all the challenges that would bring. But they were ready. Mark began working with Eleanor more closely than ever before, taking on more responsibilities in the business. They had become an inseparable team, not just in business but in life. One evening, a few weeks later, as they stood on the balcony of their home, looking out over the city, Eleanor turned to him. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Mark turned to her, his eyes filled with certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She smiled, a soft, affectionate smile that made his heart race. "Then let's take this step together, Mark. Let's make it official, not just for the world but for us." And with that, they took the final step toward a future that no longer felt uncertain. Their love was real now, not just a contract or an arrangement. It was a promise to each other, a promise to the future they would build together. And as they held each other on the balcony, watching the lights of the city sparkle beneath them, they knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. It was the beginning of something new, a love that had started as a contract but had grown into something so much more. Something real. Months passed, and the life Mark and Eleanor had built together only grew stronger. Their connection had evolved into something truly beautiful. The once transactional arrangement they had entered into had blossomed into a partnership founded on trust, mutual respect, and deep affection. Eleanor had let go of the last of her fears about vulnerability, and Mark had learned to believe in the love they shared, not just the life they had created. The business was thriving, but now, every success was not just a professional triumph, it was a shared victory, a testament to how far they had come together. One afternoon, Eleanor stood in front of the large windows in their living room, looking out over the city, her thoughts far away. Mark walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his voice warm against her ear. Eleanor smiled, leaning back into him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," she said quietly. "About how everything has changed since we first met. When we signed that contract, I never imagined it would lead to this." Mark kissed the top of her head, holding her a little tighter. "I don't think either of us did," he said. "But I'm glad it did. I'm glad we took the risk." Eleanor turned around to face him, her eyes soft. "I'm glad, too. I never thought I would find someone who truly understood me, who saw me for who I really am, not just what I've built or what I represent. But you've shown me that I'm not alone. That I can be myself, without the walls I've spent so many years building up." Mark smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You've always been more than just what you've built, Eleanor. You've always been strong, kind, and capable. I've just been lucky enough to see the real you." She leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "I used to think love was a weakness. That it would distract me from everything I had worked so hard for. But now, I know that love, true love, is what makes everything else worth it. Without it, none of the success, none of the accomplishments would matter." Mark kissed her again, his heart full. "And now, we have both. A love that is real, and a life that we've built together. We don't need to pretend anymore. This is us. And it's enough." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside seemed to fade away. For the first time in her life, Eleanor knew that she wasn't just the CEO, the businesswoman, or the woman behind the empire. She was simply herself, with the man she loved, living a life they had built together from the ground up. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real and it was theirs. That night, after dinner, Mark took Eleanor's hand and led her to the balcony. The city lights twinkled beneath them, the night air cool against their skin. As they stood there, watching the world go by, Mark turned to her, his expression serious but filled with love. "Eleanor, I never expected any of this. I never thought I'd find love in a place like this. But I did. With you." He paused, his voice steady. "And I want you to know, no matter what happens, I will always be here. For you. For us." Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. But then, she smiled, a soft, content smile that said everything her words couldn't. "And I'll always be here, Mark. For you. For us." They stood there, side by side, the future ahead of them. It wasn't a life they had expected, but it was a life they had chosen, together. And that was all they needed. Their journey wasn't over, but it had started with the most important step: trusting each other, loving each other, and letting go of the past. It was a new beginning, one filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that their love story wasn't just about contracts and business deals. It was about something deeper, something real. And that, she realized, was the greatest success of all.